we're short on time here, so let me just touch on a couple of other things here, which I think are basis for good news for us. One of the other things that's happening, and I'm assuming it's happening here in Canada as well as in the United States, but I'm seeing it especially in the United States, is that we're now seeing a transformation take place among our consumers. You know, for a long time, consumers were simply passive recipients, right? As a matter of fact, a friend of mine who is a scientist at Missouri, University of Missouri, has been looking at, you know, and studying consumer behavior for a long time, and especially the way in which our industrial food systems have been positioning themselves. And he told me once that if the industrial food system, our modern food system, were to choose an appropriate logo for itself, it would be just eat it. And this is kind of the culture that we developed. And I have to tell you, at least as I travel around now and see what's happening, particularly in our more urban communities, that era is rapidly coming to a close. And what we're seeing now is active food citizens, people who are engaged in their food system. And I think that what helped to bring about that transformation is the local food system. Because local foods originally emerged as a food miles issue, how far does food travel? But I think most everybody understands now that the distance that food travels is not the big problem. It's part of the problem, but it's not the big problem. The big problem is these other issues we talked about. But people now understand, the general public now understands that it's not the food miles. But what happened as a result of becoming more engaged with their farmers, becoming more engaged in the local food system, they became energized because they realized that there were some things that were good and some things that were not so good, some things that were going to not contribute to their future food security, some things that were, and they wanted to become more part of that process. And so we're now seeing this emergence of food systems all around the country. And all of us as farmers can work with all of these non-farmers now and address these issues together. So it's no longer the two camps of the producers and the consumers, because we're all food citizens together. And I'm seeing this happen all across the country now. And one of the other things that's emerging as a result of this is this whole concept of food sheds and food hubs, where people are starting to look at their own region. They're not talking about this so much as local food, they're talking about as their community, as their shed, their hub, and how can they work together to address these incredible challenges that we have in order to ensure food security for themselves and for their children. And it's bringing about enormous kinds of different approaches that and interesting and creative solutions that people are coming up with. Okay, so one last point that I want to make here is that another part of the issue that we need to address, and again, part of the good news is beginning to be addressed now, and that is we have to create a new culture. Because as long as we continue to be stuck in the culture of the neocolonial era, which is that, basically somebody will always come up with a new technology to solve the problem, et cetera, then we're not going to become engaged together in ways that we need to in order to address these challenges in the future. And if you want to read a really inspiring book about how this culture is already changing, Marjorie Kelly has just published a new book this year called Owning Our Future. And one of the things that she points out is that there's now beginning, again, understand this is not happening all over the world, it's beginning, and again, we have to pay attention to this bubbling up from the bottom up, this blessed unrest that Paul Hockenberg about several years ago, which is happening all across the country. And what she's saying is that now there are increasingly places in our communities where people are no longer primarily focused on extractive economies, trying to get as much wealth out of their communities for themselves as possible, but they're beginning to move into futures, which he calls generative economies, in which people are engaged together in their own communities to increase the flourishing of life in their own communities. And she gives a number of examples where this is happening all across the country. So this is part of that cultural change. And there are other, there are some economists that are trying to do this. Jack Mann, who published a book a few years ago called Privileged Goods, in which he said the basic problem with our economy is that we always privilege commodities. And what we should be doing is commodities that privilege communities, because that's really where the energy and the resources are in order to address the challenges of the future. And he uses some great examples. My favorite one, I want to share with you. He says that suppose that we lived in a community which had a local theater, which had life-changing, enriching experiences which you could take your children to. Wouldn't that be better than buying them Barbie dolls? And so you start to think about all of these ways in which we're currently focused on privileging commodities and trying to produce more commodities to enrich our lives, and think about how what we could do to enrich our communities as a more appropriate kind of. Okay, a couple other quick things which are, I think, important things to point out as we look at some of the things that are happening there that we resources. There was an article in Harvard Business Review, January, February 2011, by Michael Porter. I don't know how many of you know Michael Porter, but Michael Porter is recognized, at least in the United States, as one of the leading economists. And Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, one of his colleagues, they wrote an article called Creating Shared Value. And the short version of their position, I understand, this is a major leading economist in the country, and probably in the world. And they're saying that as we think about the future now, with these challenges that we're going to be facing, we have to develop new businesses. And any business, whether it's Coca-Cola or Walmart or whoever, any business that doesn't recognize that this is the future is simply not going to be productive. And that is that we can no longer externalize the costs because our natural capital now is becoming so compromised that those externalized costs increasingly are going to come back into your business. And so you now have to include the natural capital, the health of the natural capital into your business to be successful in the future. And the same thing is true of marginalizing labor and raw materials. In terms of food, think of farmers. Where you want to get your labor and your raw materials cheap as possible so that you can add value further up the food chain, right? He said, it's not going to work for you in the future because, and especially if you're going to outsource those, because you're going to need the kind of competent farmers dealing with the challenges that we're facing in the future in order to have the kind of food that you're going to need in order to be successful in the food business. And this is true of all of our economies. Now, when I read that, I thought, it isn't just us weird agrarians and environmentalists and some scientists like Huber that are saying this now. There's now some people who are major advisors to our business world are saying this. So, and again, this doesn't mean that I'm expecting this transformation to take place overnight, but we're moving in the right direction. Another example of this in terms of the investment community, Jeremy Grantham, who's one of the leading investment counselors in the financial world. And Jeremy Grantham advises people who want to make money on their money and how they invest their money to do that. He's doing that now for some $400 billion of investments every year. And he published an article in his newsletter in April of 2011, which he called Time to Wake Up. And his message was basically the same as that of Porter. If you want to make money on your money, you can't just do it by trying to extract loss as much as you can. You've got to start, he even talked about the need to invest in soil. Who would never have expected an investment counselor to say anything like that. So these are all bits of good news. Now, we've got a long way to go, and I look forward to this afternoon talking to someone. We'll conclude some of the biodynamics and other issues in that, but I look forward to having some further conversations with you. I think one of the other things that has a potential to play a key role in this are the arts. And a good example of this with regard to soil is Deborah Coons-Garcia spent the last 4 years now putting together a documentary on soil called The Symphony of Soil. And I can guarantee you that anybody that sees that film will no longer think that soil is just dirt, because the artistic expression that she uses to bring it up, help us understand the science of soil health and how we can do that is pretty amazing. So again, it's just one example of the role that the arts can play in our communities moves in the right direction. So I look forward to further conversations with you this afternoon. Thank you.